All it takes is the title of this review to bring out the haters. If that's you, then you see CFmoto. And if you've been following the motorcycle space for a while, this is the latest motorcycle brand to come out of China. Then comes the hatred and the vitriol for all the usual reasons lobbied towards the People's Republic. For those newer to the moto scene, CFmoto origin country may be a surprise to you, or you may not even care. Its latest example is this, the 800NK. Effectively a KTM 790 Duke with different clothes. You could think of the 800NK in a few different ways. First is the poor man's KTM 790 Duke. With essentially the same engine and frame as the 790, the NK draws attention with its $8,499 price tag, undercutting the KTM by at least $500. Second is the alternative for those who don't like orange. The 800NK comes in either white or black. Then there's the obvious styling differences. It's inevitable to compare the 800NK to the 790 Duke, so let's get that out of the way right off the bat. For starters, the engine is the same basic 799cc parallel twin. However, exterior differences will show CFmoto stamped on the cases instead of KTM. Inside, the 800NK is slightly detuned compared to the KTM, as you'll see on the dyno chart below. CFmoto claims 100 horsepower at the crankshaft and 59 pound-feet of torque. The 800NK also doesn't come with traction control, which to us seems like a pretty big cut in order to meet a price point. Like the KTM, the CFmoto also has ride modes, 3 different ones in the 800 case: Sport, Street or Rain. But considering there is no traction control, all the ride modes do is change the throttle sensitivity. The engine is also attached to the same frame as the KTM, but the subframe is a different piece, as is the swing arm. From a component standpoint, the biggest difference from the KTM is the 800NK use of KYB suspension, not WP at both ends. The inverted fork offers preload, rebound and compression adjustments, while the shock lets you change preload and rebound. WAN brakes are similar components on both the KTM and CF, but where the 800NK uses radial mount 4-piston calipers with clear J-WAN branding, the 790 Duke calipers have KTM boldly along the side. Both clamp on 320mm discs up front. There's a 260mm disc in the rear, with a 2-piston caliper. Up-spec versions of the 800NK offered in other markets include things like a quick shifter, but for the US anyway, we're only getting one version of the bike. Theoretically, whatever parts that fit on the KTM should also work on the CFmoto, but you may need to make some homebrewed mods or reflash the AQ to accept some or all of the modifications. It's hard not to walk up to the 800NK and not think it's going to be awfully similar to a 790 Duke but cheaper. Then there's the inevitable question of, is a Chinese-made motorcycle any good? Let's answer the second question first. Again, taking geopolitics out of the equation, if you never read the sticker on the frame, you'd never guess the 800NK was made in China. The fit and finish is as high as any Japanese bike we've tested, with panel gaps, all slim and even. No unsightly wiring or cabling showing, and no evidence at all that this bike is cheap. And that's not just me talking either. On a recent trip to visit Chuck Graves, the namesake of Graves Motorsports, he stopped our discussion after he heard I rode a CFmoto to his shop and parked it out front. He looked it over thoroughly, with a keen eye the likes of someone with experience like him would do, and came back with, "This thing is really nice, even down to the hardware like the bolts." Admittedly, I don't really pay attention to the bolts that come on new bikes unless I need to change their tires, but if Chuck says the bolts are nice, then I'll take his word for it. In sport mode, the full potential of the engine is unleashed with power applied in a manner that's more closely tied to when, and how much, you're actually turning the throttle. It's at this point that one can't help but draw comparisons between the 800NK and its orange counterpart. This engine has been a favorite of ours since we first threw a leg over it, and those same characteristics remain with the CFmoto. The seemingly instant torque off the bottom is fun to play with, and it's also practical for everyday riding, when you're never exploring with the upper ranges of the revs. Of course, when you do find yourself in play mode, the power is still there up top to take advantage of. Then, rowing through the gears is slick and seamless, as the clutch pull is light and a positive tap with your toe will get you the gear you want. Remember, there's no quick shifter, so shifts are done the old-fashioned way. And while we generally prefer a quick shifter in most cases, if you have to do it manually, this is not a bad gearbox to do it on. A slipper clutch comes standard for those inevitable botched downshifts, but there's always a but. While the sensitivity of the throttle in sport mode is an asset when the roads are smooth, it's also its downfall when the road is not. It's hard to modulate the throttle over bumpy and rough roads, as each bump and jolt will move your throttle hand a little bit, and that little bit is enough to open and close the throttle butterfly slightly. The result is a jerky ride. An ideal setting for everyday use would be something in between sport and street, something a little more responsive than street, but less twitchy than sport.